Perfect. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the May 10th, 2021 work session of the York County School Board. We are now entering into a very busy several weeks for students and teachers and families as we wind down the school year. Hopefully we can find time to reflect on our accomplishments and celebrate the opportunities awaiting in our near future. We have several presentations this evening. The first one is a reopening update. So Dr. Shandor, can you please share some additional information?
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. Good evening, board members. We have 5 presentations for you this evening. We are going to start off tonight's meeting with a reopening update. As you know, Dr. Carroll has provided these updates for the last, it's got to be 10 months now, multiple times a month. So he does have some good news to share tonight, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Carroll.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. So here we go again. Tonight's will be rather brief, but it's a lot of good news. So thank you, Dr. Shandor, Chairman Higginbotham, and members of the board. So first we'll start out with the health metrics. This is going to look a little different to you tonight because the VDH has once again chosen to change how they're reporting things out.
Of course.
So the graph looks different. You'll remember the last few times it's been kind of an orange, red, yellow kind of color scheme. This is from their local health metrics because you'll remember that the school metrics have been presented once a week, and then there's a 4-day delay on that. So the last school report we got is May 1st data. This is from the local health locality metrics report. And the last time we reported to you, the county was at 78.1 per 100,000, which was substantial. That was on May 1st. So using these local metrics, we now see that we are now in moderate as of May 5th. That was the first day that we were down in under 50 at 48.3. And we have remained in moderate since. And today's report had us at 33.9. So they've moved to this model. You see that they've got the 7-day totals, and they now have the correct thresholds for the designations for community transmission. That only changed late last week. So this is up to date. You also see that the positivity is at 3.5%, and that's below. That's in the lowest category of below 5. So things are looking really good, and you see the arrows to the right where we continue to trend down. Also with our internal case dashboard, you've seen this in a number of meetings. Remember that there was quite a spike after spring break, and we're finally seeing those reduce. This is as of 3 o'clock today, I believe, and you see 3 active cases, and there are about 45 related or not related quarantines to that. So we're starting to see those reduce. Now remember, those numbers are a little bigger, about double what we were seeing before we moved to 4 days of in-school attendance, because we're moving the students well within that 6-foot radius as far as social distancing. But we are still not seeing transmission in the buildings. We haven't had a non-athletic transmission since February 8th. And so things are going really well, and now we're down to 3 active cases. I believe there'll be 1 that will go on later today. So things are still doing very well within the buildings. As you know, revisions to guidance keep coming, and I've got one hot off the press here. The governor has made a 7th revision to Executive Order 72. Now this was done a little while ago, but you'll remember that it's not effective till May 15th. There's been a lot of talk about now we can start taking our masks off, especially outside, but a lot of that executive order didn't apply to us, and especially where we're having gatherings for athletics. So there's no change really for us when it comes to face coverings. It did increase the numbers allowed in indoor and outdoor events. So we went from indoors from 50 to 100 and outside from 100 to 250. And really the only change for us is that the required spacing between people is from 10 feet to 6 feet. But it's really kind of a moot point for us because when we're looking at our athletics would be our largest gatherings, we're talking about spring sports that don't bring the larger crowds. So yes, there's been a change to the spacings, but we're not doing anything functionally with any of our seating in reaction to that. I'm sorry. And then the big news was at the bottom there. The FDA, we just learned right before the meeting, just approved the Pfizer vaccine for students or children 12 years and up. And we were expecting that as soon as this week, and my bullet point doesn't really work there. They just approved it. And I was changing this right before the meeting. So it's approved now. And so I'll talk about that a little more in the next steps. So we continue to plan for a full return in the fall. And as I've said in the past, mitigation will match whatever guidance we have at that time. And we are exploring plans for how we're going to assist in the facilitation of Pfizer vaccination for those parents that would want their children 12 and up vaccinated. We're talking to people up in Williamsburg, James City County. We're also talking to our local authorities. As more rolls out on this, we'll be talking about how we're going to help facilitate that for those who choose to get it. And I want to remind the community again that we want everybody to strictly follow the mitigation practices in the community. That, along with a vaccination, is why we've gotten to where we are. So we ask people to continue to wear their masks, wash their hands, do their daily health screenings, and stay home when they're sick. And that applies to staff and students. And finally, just want to reiterate to the community, we want to make sure that they know where there's access to get vaccinations. And so online, you see the online link there and then a phone number. And that's all it takes is to reach out in one of those two formats, and then you should be able to get a vaccination in pretty short order. That concludes my report, and I welcome any questions.
When an elementary school student is quarantining, they just log in virtually during that quarantine time so that they're still getting access to instruction?
Yes, they work it out with the schools. They're
Okay.
working that out on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, no, I just think it's good news to see, I mean, some of those numbers, and I also heard that Virginia's at a 7-month low, overall, so I think York County's right in line with the declining numbers. But we appreciate you keeping us informed every 2 weeks, and a lot of times even within those 2 weeks with emails and things like that. So thank you very much, Dr. Carroll.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll.
Our next presentation is a strategic plan update relating to Goal 4, Objective 4.2, Cultural Awareness. For the strategic plan update, Dr. Shandor, would you like to share some more comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. We actually, Dr. Butler is actually going to present both of these goals in one presentation. So I'll now turn it over to Dr. Butler.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Higginbotham, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to provide a strategic plan update on Goal 4, Objectives 2 and 3, Cultural Awareness and Learning Opportunities. I am pleased to share the actions taken to further the implementation of Objectives 2 and 3 related to evidence-based professional development and learning opportunities focused on cultural learning and respect for students and families of diverse cultures. To frame the presentation this evening, I will focus on 3 domains. First, the use of culturally responsive approaches which are embedded in the Virginia Tiered System of Supports framework. Second, review the various professional development offerings related to social emotional learning. And third, share an overview of classroom-based, student-focused instructional practices related to cultural learning. While the pandemic prevented face-to-face professional development, we continued to provide trainings related to tiered systems of support. Several members of the division-level leadership team participated in a 4-part training on using the Navigating Educational Equity Toolkit, which was developed by the Virginia Department of Education to integrate culturally responsive and effective classroom approaches into our positive behavior intervention system, which we refer to as PBIS. Components of the Equity Toolkit were shared in October, January, and April during our quarterly PBIS team trainings and coaching sessions. In March, the General Assembly passed House Bill 1904 and Senate Bill 1196, which required that teacher evaluations beginning in the 2021-2022 school year include a performance standard on cultural competence and equitable practices. To assist staff with meeting this expectation, a Safe Schools training module will be offered on cultural competence and implicit bias as a required annual staff training. Additional follow-up trainings will be facilitated by the Human Resource, Instructional, and School Administration departments to expand upon this foundational training module. Every staff member that interacts with students have the ability to make a positive impact on student safety, mental wellness, and attitude. Carrie Gonzalez, one of our elementary school counselors, worked with Colonial Behavioral Health to offer several full-day trainings on youth mental health first aid to division staff. In addition, we also provided training K-12 instructional staff on child and adolescent mental health awareness through the Cognito virtual training program. To support classroom instruction and integrate cultural learning, Dr. Vika Stevenson and Bethany Friedman worked with several members of the instructional department team and classroom teachers to develop an African American history repository in the Canvas learning management system. The page offers a variety of literature, web-based resources, and videos to enrich and expand the content teachers can embed and use with classroom-based lessons. History and English teachers were provided a training with how to use the resource page and provided with an overview of all of the available resources and supportive content. Last school year, the instruction department provided each elementary school with a set of books with a focus on diverse voices and cultures in our community and world. This year, additional selections were donated to every elementary school to increase the diversity of library offerings. Additionally, each middle school English classroom has been equipped with a grade level appropriate Lacey Calcal classroom library that includes a variety of texts featuring diverse authors and characters. Both middle and high schools have been provided supplemental texts with a variety of genres and levels to encourage both independent and summer reading for fun. In response to the pandemic, Dr. David Wrights, the Director of Elementary Instruction, provided elementary schools with books that focused on the experiences of children navigating and processing life during COVID-19. Additionally, since York County has the highest concentration of military-connected children in the Commonwealth, Mrs. Cheryl Parr, in her role as the Division Military Liaison, worked with schools to coordinate classroom-based and school-wide activities recognizing the voices and experiences of military-connected children and families. At the elementary level, teachers used the Sanford Harmony program to provide social-emotional learning activities during their morning meetings to begin the school day. School counselors worked with teachers to provide more expansive lessons on Wednesday during the student wellness attendance check-in session. At the secondary level, school counselors worked with homeroom teachers to use the castle-based social-emotional learning activities each Wednesday. Through a partnership with the Virginia affiliate of Young Audiences, Arts for Learning, our elementary counselors were given access to videos that use music, puppets, and drama to help facilitate SEL discussions with students. And we see an image here of one of these lessons. Since 2017, the Committee for Equity and Diversity has been working to support the division's efforts related to the implementation of the strategic plan. This year, the committee used the equity audit tool developed by the Virginia Department of Education to review current practices and make recommendations to align division-based programs and actions with evidence-based practices. 4 recommendations came from the committee this year. One was to increase school-based focus on equity and diversity through existing professional learning communities. Second, evaluate the literature selections in school libraries at the secondary level to ensure there are diverse offerings similar to those offered at the elementary schools. Third, continue offering staff development trainings that are focused on culturally responsive approaches to instruction and how to build positive school climate. And finally, use the Virginia Department of Education Navigating Equity Toolkit to evaluate curriculum for cultural inclusivity and review practices through the equity framework. Thank you for this opportunity to provide updates to Goal 4. I am now available for questions.
Just a comment. I know you've been working on this for some time, and it got delayed because of the pandemic. And I appreciate all the hard work everybody's put into this, so thank you for doing that.
The first recommendation, can you just explain a little bit more about what that recommendation means?
Oh, yes, ma'am. So currently, all of our schools, we already use the PLC framework for how we can evaluate student performance and work. And so now that we have Power BI, we can look at data, so we can look at matters of equity and use that as some of the focus points for some of the professional learning communities. So not anything new, it's just using some different, using that same existing tool set to look at different data sets.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Butler, on the social emotional learning, looking at slide 10, you know, we've got the daily class meetings, the additional lessons on Wednesdays. Are we looking at how we keep those lessons ongoing when we don't have a Wednesday break necessarily next year? How we continue the SEL piece? Are you exploring that currently?
Yes, sir. There's a task force that's been set up. Dr. Gould, along with Katie Gaylord, who's the coordinator for school counseling, and Matt Taman from Student Services, they have a task force where they're building out a full framework so that we can make sure that we have these SEL competencies built in throughout the whole school year. Okay. And so they're working on the framework, and that should be ready for staff. There's also some guidance from the Department of Education that's providing us guidance as well to use with this implementation.
Good show. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Butler.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Butler.
Next, we have a budget update. Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. We're going to now ask our Chief Finance Officer, Mr. Bowen, to present some information related to the FY 21-22 operating budget.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Higginbotham, members of the board, Dr. Shandor, I have just a brief budget update for this evening. When the school board approved the school board for the FY22 operating budget back in March, the state and the county had yet to complete their budget processes. And oftentimes what we'll see is we'll see changes, particularly with state and federal funding, that need to be incorporated in the final budget. However, in the final state budget, there were no additional changes. But there was a supplemental allocation of federal stimulus dollars that was announced just recently, and we'll need to incorporate that in a final budget, and I'll bring that to you at the business meeting later this month. Also, last week on May 4th, the Board of Supervisors approved our capital improvements budget and operating budget for FY22. Now, although we've received a separate allocation or another allocation of federal funding, we do not have to take our budget back to the county by county ordinance. If another appropriating body like the state or the federal government provides additional allocations to us, we can handle that just by the board's approval, by the school board's approval. Now, I mentioned about the federal stimulus allocation. What I wanted to do now is just take a few minutes and just kind of review the federal stimulus funds that we've received to date. We've had several announcements since May of last year, and just kind of wanted to walk you through where we are and what the status of those funds are. So CARES Act 1, these funds were awarded to the school division in May of 2020. They expired in September of 2022. Our total allotment was $583,700, and as of June 30, we will have spent all those funds. Now, the ESSER 1 and GEAR funds, these were allotments, carve-outs from the CARES Act 1 funds, but also funding that came from governor's discretionary funds, and these were competitive grants. And there was an application process in August, and the school division applied for 8 of 9 programs, and we were awarded 7 of those programs. And the total was $434,897, and as of June 30, we'll expect to have spent all those funds. Now, the most challenging fund application we've had to date has been the coronavirus relief funds. And this was very challenging because of the initial window that we had to spend these funds. We were awarded the funds in October, and through the month of October and through early November, we were still receiving lots of guidance from the state and also from the U.S. Department of Education of how these funds could be spent. And initially, there was a deadline to spend these funds by December 30, 2020. So we had about 2 months to spend more than almost $2.3 million. However, the team pulled together, we got it done, we had everything reimbursed by the fall break, by the winter break. However, after the winter break, the federal government extended it another year. And then in January of 2021, we received CARES Act 2 funding. These funds expire in September of 2023, so we have about 2.5 years to spend these funds. This is $2.3 million. Currently, we haven't spent any of these funds. However, about $1 million is currently in the budget to support positions. And then the remaining funds will be added to the budget to support the summer academy, expanded summer academy. ESSER 2, this is another round of competitive grants. Although these funds haven't been awarded, we received an announcement on May 3rd, and this is another grant that has a tight window. The applications are due on the 28th of May. Ms. Skinner and her team are actually working on these applications. And there's about $62 million that's available statewide under 2 programs. And one is to address the learning loss, and then the other is to address expanded school year or implementation of a year-round school. And then final, and this was the most recent allocation, the CARES Act 3, we received notification on April 30th. These funds expire in September of 2024. We're receiving $5.2 million, and again, these funds have not been spent. We're working on allocation and working on a budget right now. So between CARES Act 2 and CARES Act 3, we have about $7.5 million that we plan to extend as long as we can. We're anxious to see how the summer academy works, and if it's very successful, we'll try to continue that as long as we can. We could do that for actually 4 summers if we can plan those funds appropriately. However, what will happen is through the summer academy and through the start of next year, the instruction department will be doing lots of assessment on our students, and then the budgets and the funds will be somewhat fluid as we identify those needs. Also, the CARES Act 1, 2, and 3 and the coronavirus relief funds were all based on the Title I formula. The other two, the ESSER 1 and the ESSER 2, those were competitive grants, and so they were awarded based on the applications. In total, we have received about $10.8 million. And while that's a lot of money, it really does pale in comparison to some of the other school divisions, what we've seen. Some school divisions have received an upwards of $80 to $100 million. So as we talk about the use of funds, the emphasis is really on the remediation activities. Some of the things that we've already used these funds for have been for e-tutoring, evening e-tutoring. We're going to be using these funds for our expanded summer academy, for social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health supports, certainly for technologies. As we've been forced really to implement a one-to-one program, we've used a lot of federal funds for the devices, but also for some of the software to help facilitate the virtual instruction. And then we've used it for PPE and cleaning supplies, and we expect that some of these additional funds that we've received late will continue to be used for the PPE and cleaning supplies. And then something else that the federal government and state has been emphasizing is the use of federal dollars for HVAC upgrades. There's a little bit of a challenge with this. We do have 2 projects currently on our CIP for HVAC upgrades. One is the Seaford Elementary renovation. The second is Mount Vernon, which is specific to HVAC. And the concern here is when you use federal dollars for construction, it triggers a provision called the Davis-Bacon Act. And what that means is that we're required to pay federal prevailing wages as opposed to local wages. And so what that typically does is that generally raises the cost of the construction. And then it also includes an administrative oversight. So you have to audit the contractors and make sure the contractors are paying the subcontractors all the prevailing wage. So we want to stay away from that as much as possible. So what our plan is to carve out about $500,000 in our stimulus funds for the A&E portion of those HVAC projects. Because A&E services are professional services, it doesn't trigger the Davis-Bacon Act. So, but it does allow us to use some of those funds to help us where we need some help, which is on the CIP, because since the infusion of these federal dollars, and because also of the shortage of some of the raw materials for construction, we've seen cost increases already at 20 to 30%. So this will help us in our CIP where there's going to be some need. And then finally, I just wanted to remind remind you and the community, because we hear this often, is why can't the stimulus funds be used for raises? Well, it's not allowed. It's a provision it's actually prohibited in the grants. Now, what we can do and what we have done is the programs that we do run, like the e-tutoring, those services are provided during the evening, and we are stipending those teachers who provide those services. As you're aware, we are having some challenges hiring summer school staff, so we've had to temporarily raise some of those hourly rates to incentivize staff to work with us. So we're using some of those funds to pay for those staff members for the summer academy. However, these funds cannot be used for permanent raises. And that concludes my presentation for this evening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
I'd like to comment also, and I guess they can't be used for raises because they're one-time funds, they're not recurring, so.
Correct.
That's how we typically, with paying for raises for employees, is when we increase our budget and it continues on and on. But for one time, if we used it for raises, we wouldn't have any money the next year to fund it. But in the technology portion of it, I know you talked about devices that we could purchase and that sort of thing. What about our infrastructure, bandwidth, and that sort of thing? Can we increase that, or has that already, I think we've already increased some of that and done some changes, I thought.
Not specific for bandwidth internal, but what we have been able to do and what we have provided are some MiFis for students who don't have internet home service, and those are programs that we're allowed to spend those funds on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about technology also, and how we used to be looking at it, that it was very expensive, and we were kind of unsure in a few years, but can it be used for the things like the warranty services and those things too?
Yes, it can.
Okay, good.
And we actually used the coronavirus relief funds for the warranty services. It cost us about $1.5 million that we paid up front over the course of the 4 years.
And if you remember, excuse me, if you remember, we couldn't charge a fee this past year, correct? We couldn't
Correct.
charge a fee for the use of the devices because they were the primary mode of instruction.
Correct.
And we're going, all these students will be turning back in these devices at the end of the year, correct?
They're working on a plan for that because some of these students will be transitioning right into summer school
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
with these devices, but they're working on a plan because they do need to pull these devices back and update them for the next year.
I'm just saying we will have absolutely no idea what the cost is going to be once we get these devices back to find out what we have to do to them to fix them, update them, correct? I mean, obviously, we have our technology reserve fund, but
Yes.
if we're returning all, I'm
We
I'm
have
just
received
envisioning
some
elementary school
devices
kids.
back that have been damaged or destroyed, and we're working with the families
Yeah,
on.
that's been an ongoing process throughout
Has
the school
been.
year.
Right, okay. And then you talked about the e-tutoring. Are we able to expand that? Are we already planning to expand that beyond this year?
We're planning to continue that. Whether it needs to be expanded, we'll wait for Ms. Skinner and her staff to make those recommendations. And if so, then, those, like I said, those budgeted funds will be fluid, and we'll be able to shift funds where necessary and where needed.
Great. I hope that's one of the things that we can keep going, because I think we've learned a lot, that it really does help our kids. So I think it's great. Thank you.
One more quick comment. Hey, tip of the hat to the grants centralized team as well as all the other support. I know they're competitive and we've had great success, so my hat's off to the team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen.
Our next update is on health insurance. Dr. Shandor, would you provide some more information?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. We've had several discussions with you, board, over the past several months related to health insurance. So Dr. Vladu is going to provide, I think, our final update related to health insurance this year. He has a lot of information to share with you, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Higginbotham, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an update on the status of health insurance. Take a second to open this presentation. Right. So before I begin, I want to share with you some commitments. First, we recognize from a recruitment and retention perspective that providing a competitive compensation package is a top priority. Also, keeping employee rates at or below the regional average keeps health insurance accessible as well as sustainable. On this slide, I want to make some comparisons. The blue bars represent the employee rates currently. The green bars represent the employee rates that will take effect January 1, 2022. And the purple bars represent the regional average for comparable plans. As a reminder, on this slide, we're comparing YCSD next year's rates with our current rates. As such, the regional rates are also expected to go up in the next year, which provides even a more favorable comparison for YCSD employees. On this slide, I would like to share some important facts. As this chart or pie chart indicates, 81% of the operating budget is spent on compensation and benefits. The remainder is spent on everything else. As though regional variation occurs, health insurance increases by 5% annually. The division has absorbed the majority of healthcare increases over the past few years. Lastly, because compensation is Virginia retirement system creditable and impacts retirement pay, it is important to continue to focus on compensation while being responsible to manage the cost of healthcare. This chart is particularly informative. The green bars represent health insurance revenues. The blue bars represent expenses or the division cost of providing these benefits. The red line, however, represents the health and dental insurance reserve fund. I also want to take a note or to share that the FY21 data is not complete. We still have 2 months in the year, so that those numbers are expected to go up. Now let's look at the trend. As you can see, both revenues and expenses remain steady until 2018. However, beginning in 2019 and continuing to 2020, expenses outpaced revenues. As a result, the $6.2 million that used to be in the reserve fund was used to make up the difference. Also in 2021, we added additional funds to cover the increases in health insurance costs. On this slide, you're looking on a monthly expenses and budgeted rates trend. The green line represents actual paid claims and expenses. The blue line represents budgeted rates. Most glaring is that in the past 14 months, expenses significantly outpaced budgeted rates. As I shared, the gap between health insurance budgets and actual paid claims and expenses were made up to the use of the reserve fund. As these funds were used up, additional funds were used to cover those claims. These funds were not enough, which is one of the reasons our organization, the county and YCSD, went back up to bid. So under the current provider, as you saw through the numbers, since 2018, cost overruns range between 120 to 130%. In other words, for every $100 budgeted for healthcare, we spend 120 or 130. These cost overruns were addressed with the consultants since the very beginning, back in 2019, months into the new provider experience. So we required or asked that they provide an explanation. We are told through the data that more employees went to the doctor for outpatient services such as MRIs, and they went there more frequently. Also, the provider discounts, which are the negotiated price between the carrier and local providers, these discounts were not as high as initially projected. So in sum, we reviewed multiple years of data through our consultant, and it became increasingly clear that the current provider discounts are largely responsible for the cost overruns. In other words, the cost for the exact same procedure is higher with the current provider than with other recognized providers. This, coupled by increasing utilization of these outpatient services, explains some of the difference in the cost I just shared with you. Lastly, the impact on the health insurance reserve fund and having to set additional funds to cover healthcare expenses is the factor that's going to continue to impact our ability to compete with compensation, which is why we're here going through the RFP process right now. On this slide, I want to share with you the request for proposal, or RFP, criteria, which is used to evaluate both the current provider and other competitors. The size of the network, cost, customer service, as well as references are critically important in evaluating any provider. This is a thorough process, and over the next couple of slides, I will share more information. So this past October and November, we collaborated with the county and our consultant USI to draft the request for proposal, and which was released. In January, the RFPs were returned, and throughout February and March, we held countless meetings with the county and USI to review proposals and interview the bidders. Also in March, we provided an update to the Benefits Committee, and in late April, the best and final offers were made. Just this month, based on the criteria I shared with you, YCSD made a recommendation to County Purchasing Department. An update to the Benefits Committee is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Moving forward, you will see next steps required to finalize the contract, prepare for open enrollment, and implement a possible new carrier. So I want to close with the following summation. I share the features of the current plan, the impact on the Health Insurance Reserve Fund, and the relationship between increasing health insurance rates and compensation. As a benefit, health insurance is one factor in attracting the best and the brightest teachers, but also keeping the best and the brightest teachers as staff. The RFP process provides the opportunity to review other carriers for additional value to both our employees and the school division. Through this process, we'll keep the structure of the existing plans and introduce a third option, which will have a deductible. This plan will provide another cost-effective choice to our employees. Lastly, as insurance rates impact take-home pay, health insurance increases are aligned with significant compensation increases. I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the status of health insurance. At this time, I am open for your questions and comments.
I have a question here on slide 5. I want to make sure I'm correct. The year that we were asked to do joint health care with the county, was that the beginning of 2019?
Thank you, Mr. Richardson, for that question. So if you're looking at 2018, that was the last year on the plan. So that was the year that we implemented. The process of going to a joint purchase and shared services really began back in 2016, but 2018 is when it actually took effect.
Correct. So a lot of our expenses started then, which we thought it was going to be, it was purported to be a big savings. It wasn't, didn't really turn out to be in the healthcare part of it. Maybe in the prescription, but not in the healthcare.
That is correct. That the anticipated savings did not pan out.
Okay. So when we select our insurer through the bids, if it's the same one or a different one or whatever, we're not relying on the county this time. We're doing our own bid. If they want to join with us, that's fine. Is
So
that
with the
correct?
help of a consultant, which represents, as a fiduciary that represents our interest, we have gone out through this process. I can tell you, the YCSD team asked questions that are relevant, they're impactful, and they're really targeted on our experience. So we're really able to hone in. Our goal is to provide the same service, if not a better service, but really control those costs. But certainly, we are represented to the consultant.
And the consultant was paid by the county, not by this division, correct?
We both the YCSD shares.
Shared the cost?
That's right.
Okay.
With the county.
Okay. And that's rightfully so, that makes sense. All right.
Yes.
That was my only question. I think we were anticipating a big cost savings, and it didn't transpire because the savings weren't there. The deals weren't the same with that insurance carrier as what we'd had previously. So I understand. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So on that same slide, from 2018 to now, that the reserve fund has dropped $6.26 million or $6.2 million. But does that include, I know that we have put some end-of-year funds and things like that in it. So is it actually a bigger, is it a bigger loss than just that 6.2?
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. The school board has approved almost $4 million to be transferred for this year alone. We have not transferred all those funds. We're only transferring those funds that we need. But we are also, because this is the challenging year that we were having, and not knowing about hold harmless till late in the year, we really wanted to see how this end of year was going to work. So we're going through that process right now. We are going to have funds at the end of the year to shore up the health insurance reserve.
Okay.
So we've received the approval, we just haven't made all of the transfers that have been approved.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, that was my question, was about the reserve fund, yes.
I think we're much better informed with regard to utilization, correct?
Yes, we have those patterns really develop. Our initial thought was, is this a trend with increasing utilization? Is it a bump or is it a new trend? Our folks really went to the doctor more often, as I shared. So those numbers are pretty stable right now.
Okay, all right, that's good news. That informs the RFP, or the selection process. And provider discounts, any insights through the consultant, or?
Great question. These are highly guarded industry, sort of hidden for a variety of reasons. We really pressed very hard to get those and to get those in writing. And certainly, previously, they were not available, but based on repeated requests, now they're available, which allows us to make a really clear comparison between these providers.
I think they understand how competitive the environment is, and there's a willingness to provide some insight, so it's good.
And they
news.
change constantly. They're ongoing.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Yes, I remember one of the providers coming down quite a bit during the negotiation process. And I think that as well-informed as we are this time going in, that we won't be blindsided again like we were back in 2018.
Certainly.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Vladu.
Thank you, Dr. Ledoux.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That was the last presentation for our agenda this evening. I appreciate the time and effort put forth by the staff to provide these updates to the school board. We are going to adjourn our work session, have a short recess, and then we will call to order our special meeting. So I adjourn the work session, and we are now in recess.
Yeah, it's Sunday.
Yeah, I noticed that.
No, I think we'll be fine.
Yeah, so I
I
saw it on
really think
Facebook. I
it
was
won't be
like,
as bad as what
I
you
think
think
it was his
because.
dad that came up to me afterwards. He said, "I need some tissues." He was crying.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were a sweet couple.
And they've
known
been
each other for a
fixing
long
them the
time,
whole year.
That couple.
So
The date or
my
whatever,
biggest
she's-
concern.
Sean. Back up.
I would now like to call to order the May 10, 2021 special meeting of the York County School Board. We have two items in need of approval this evening, and the first one is about a procurement resolution. Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. I'm going to ask Mr. Bowen if he'll please come to the podium. He has 4 or 5 items that he's going to share some information to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Higginbotham, members of the board, you should have a resolution in front of you. There's 5 items on Resolution 2119. This is a resolution requiring your authorization for items costing more than $50,000. There's one item in particular that's very time-sensitive. That's the very first item, various kitchen equipment at various locations for $207,000. These funds will be coming from the food service fund to pay for the kitchen equipment. We also have an item for replacement of phone switches, $132,000. Food service to replace a freezer for $112,000. This will also be paid for out of the food service fund. We have a modification to A&E cost at Seaford Elementary School for $77,000. And then we have data cables and security camera work at the Bruton High School Learning Commons for $60,740.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen.
The maintenance building freezer, this is one of those huge, like, walk-in ones for $112,000?
Correct.
Is that what it is?
It's a big one.
Just making sure.
It's not a college freezer.
If you ever tour that facility, it's a good size. You'll
Yeah.
see it. Yeah.
Okay. We are in need of a motion and a second to approve Resolution 21-19.
So, Mr. Chair, I move that we approve Resolution 21-19, a resolution authorizing the specific procurement.
Second?
Ms. Ford, we have a motion and a second. You can pull the board.
Yes, a motion was made by Mr. Richardson and seconded by Mrs. Geralds to approve Resolution 2119, and you may cast your votes. Mr. Myatt, Mr. Schaefer, and Ms. Geralds. The motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we need to have expedited approval of revisions to policy JEC and policy JECB. Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. Next, we're going to have our attorney, Ms. Melanie Barry, share some information related to this, to policy section JEC, and this is for expedited. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Barry.
Good evening, Mr. Higginbotham, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor. Tonight, I am bringing you revisions to JEC and JECB for expedited review. The Virginia Department of Education has recently expanded the availability of full-time synchronous instruction through its Virtual Virginia program. This did begin back in 2020 with a pilot program, and in March, they have begun offering the divisions throughout the state, K through 12 students, the option for high-quality, full-time, daily synchronous instruction for the 2021-2022 school year. Due to the shift in the Virtual Virginia program, we are revising JEC and JECB to clarify how non-resident students would enroll in that program. For full enrollment in the Virtual Virginia program, the non-resident student would enroll through the division in which they reside. For non-resident students that are still going to continue with the York County School Division in the in-person instruction and possibly taking a class here or there through the virtual program, they would still enroll with the York County School Division. Are there any questions?
Any questions, guys?
Pretty
No
straightforward.
questions.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to recommend approval of policy JEC and JECB.
Do we have a second? Second. Ms. Ford?
Yes, a motion was made by Mr. Richardson and seconded by Mrs. Geralds to approve the policies, and you may cast your votes. Mr. Richardson?
Nothing's shown up. There it is.
There it
It showed up.
We're at the end of the line.
I know.
Little delay. Okay, and the motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
Before we adjourn, Dr. Shandor, did you have anything else to share?
Yeah, I just had one announcement. Really, this is for our community and for our staff members and for our board members. Tomorrow, Tuesday at 6 o'clock on Wavy TV 10, there'll be a special feature related to one of our elementary students. And she is participating in a project at one of our middle schools. And the middle schoolers are developing something specific just for her. So I did share a little bit with this with the board members before, and I think it'd be a fascinating story for our community to watch and for board members to watch as well. Again, that's tomorrow at 6 o'clock on Wavy. Thank you.
Our next regular meeting will be Monday, May 24th at 7 p.m. here in the boardroom. Our special meeting is now adjourned. Have a great evening.